Welcome to Crime Secrets. Today we delve into a chilling case from the quiet suburb of Meteri, Louisiana, where an illicit relationship ended in tragedy. The life of a young man was brutally cut short in a crime that shocked the entire community. This is the story of Brandon Tibido, an 18-year-old whose life was tragically interrupted by a forbidden relationship that spiraled out of control. He lived in meteri, a quiet suburb of New Orleans. Brandon was in his senior year at East Jefferson High School, where he excelled both academically and in auto mechanics. He had a true passion for cars, spending hours working on engines and dreaming of opening his own auto repair shop. One day his friends often saw him with grease-stained hands, tinkering with old cars in his driveway. Brandon lived with his grandmother, a woman who had lost her sight and relied on him for daily care. Despite his youth, Brandon took on this responsibility with surprising maturity. He balanced school, a part-time job at a local garage, and caring for his grandmother without complaint. Neighbors often commented on his kindness, noting how he always found time to help anyone in need. Brandon had been dating Pet Gerard for 2 years. Lee, also 18, was a smart and ambitious young woman who shared dreams of a bright future with Brandon. They talked about getting married after graduation and starting a family. Brandon often saved money to take Lee to nice places like Café Dawned, where they dreamed of their future while enjoying a good meal. The couple was inseparable, and everyone expected them to have a long and happy life together. But beneath the surface there was a dark secret. Brandon was having an affair with Lee's mother, Pet Gerard, a 43-year-old woman who ran a multi-level marketing company called Beauty Buys Pet. Was attractive and successful, but had a complicated relationship with her daughter, often competing with her for men's attention. Brandon's affair with Paulette was a secret that weighed heavily on him, complicating his life in ways he hadn't foreseen. Despite his dreams and plans, Brandon's life took a tragic turn. His secret affair would soon lead to a violent and horrifying end, leaving the Métis community stunned and his loved ones devastated by the loss of such a promising young man. On the morning of August 12, 2021, Meteri, Louisiana, was already feeling the oppressive summer heat around 8 a.m. Brandon's grandmother, Mabel, noticed something was wrong. Mabel, blind and dependent on Brandon for care, hadn't heard him moving around the house that morning. Worried, she called out to him, but there was no response, sensing that something was amiss. Despite her disability, she managed to call a neighbor, Mrs. Alice Dupree, for help. Mrs. Dupree, a retired Reed nurse who lived just 2 houses away, rushed to Brandon's home. She had known Brandon since he was a small child and couldn't imagine that anything was seriously wrong. But as soon as she entered the house, she felt a chill. The living room was strangely silent, and there was an unusual metallic smell in the air. Mrs. Dupree called out for Brandon, but the house remained silent. She followed the smell to Brandon's room, and when she opened the door, the sight before her was unimaginable. Brandon's lifeless body lay on the floor, practically floating in his own blood. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and his eyes were nearly gouged out. The knife, still covered in blood, lay on the floor beside him. Mrs. Dupree froze in shock, her hand trembling as she dialed 911. Her usually calm and comforting voice shook as she described the scene to the operator. "Oh, Sheriff, there's blood everywhere," she stammered. Minutes later, police and paramedics arrived at the modest, single-story house on West Meteri Avenue. The flashing lights and gathering neighbors added a surreal atmosphere. As the first responders entered, they were met with a grotesque scene that would haunt them for years. Mrs. Dupree, who had initially tried to stay calm, was now visibly shaken, leaning on another neighbor for support. Mabel, still in her chair in the living room, kept asking what was happening, unaware of the horror just a few meters away. The quiet neighborhood had become the epicenter of a brutal crime, one that would leave everyone reeling. The Meteri Police Department arrived at Brandon Tibido's home within minutes of Mrs. Dupree's 911 call on the morning of August 12, 2021. Leading the investigation was Detective Michael Duval, a veteran investigator with over 20 years on the force, known for his non-nonsense approach and dedication. Duval was a respected figure in the department. He was accompanied by Detective Renee Martinez, a younger officer with a sharp mind and an eye for detail. As they entered the house, the crime scene was immediately overwhelming. What was once a cozy room was now a gruesome sight. Blood spattered the walls and floor, creating a chaotic pattern that told a story of extreme violence and desperation. The smell of iron permeated the air, mixing with the stifling August morning heat. Brandon's body lay crumpled on the floor. The brutality of the attack evident in the multiple stab wounds and the near dismemberment of his eyes. The kitchen knife used in the attack, a common but lethal weapon, lay beside him, covered in blood. Despite his years of experience, Detective Duval couldn't shake the knot in his stomach as he surveyed the scene. He knew immediately that this wasn't an act of random violence. The ferocity of the attack suggested something deeply personal. This wasn't just a murder. Duval believed it was a crime of passion. Martinez began photographing the scene carefully, documenting every detail. They meticulously collected evidence, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. The knife blood patterns and any fingerprints were carefully recorded, so forensic science could later piece together the sequence of events as they worked. The detectives also took note of the condition of the rest of the house. The living room where Mabel sat remained untouched, a stark contrast to the horror in the bedroom. This indicated that the attack had been swift, catching Brandon by surprise. Possibly during his morning routine outside, neighbors had gathered, murmuring among themselves, trying to understand the tragedy that had struck their quiet community. Detective Duval knew the importance of acting quickly. He assigned officers to canvass the neighborhood, hoping that someone might have seen or heard something unusual in a close-knit place like meteri, where everyone knew each other. There was always a chance that someone had noticed something that could provide a break in the case. The first suspect on Detective Duval's list was Pet Gerard, the mother of Brandon's girlfriend Lee. Pet 43 had always been the center of attention in Mater's social circles. She was known for her striking appearance and her successful multi-level marketing business, Beauty Buys, which sold cosmetics and skincare products. Some locals whispered that her business was a scam, but Paulette dismissed the criticism, enjoying the financial rewards and the spotlight it brought her. Petit had a complicated relationship with her daughter Lee. Although they seemed close friends, noticed underlying tension between them, often stemming from Poet's jealousy of Lee's youth, and Beauty Paulette had a habit of competing with her daughter for attention, especially from men. This rivalry took a dark turn when Peta began an affair with Brandon Tibido, her daughter's boyfriend. The affair was a carefully kept secret known only to the two, but it remained a secret that could destroy lives. Pet justified the relationship as a way to recapture her lost youth. But it was clear she was becoming dangerously obsessed with Brandon. When Detective Duval and Detective Martinez questioned Pet, she was visibly upset, but tried to maintain her composure. She was impeccable, dressed in a tailored pantsuit, and her makeup was flawless. But there was a nervousness in her eyes that didn't go unnoticed. The detectives began with routine questions, asking her about her relationship with Brandon and her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Paulette claimed she had been home alone, working late on her business. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness when she spoke about Brandon. She described him as a charming boy, but minimized their relationship, referring to him only as my daughter's boyfriend. However, as the interrogation continued, her facade began to crack. When Duval pressed her about the affair, Poet's demeanor changed drastically. She became defensive and her answers grew short and curt. At first she denied the affair, but when confronted with evidence, she broke down. Tears began to roll down her face as she confessed to the affair, but she adamantly denied any involvement in Brandon's murder. He was my angel, she sobbed. I swear to God I would never hurt him. Despite her emotional outburst, Detective Duval wasn't convinced. Pet's obsession with Brandon and her intense jealousy of her daughter made her the prime suspect. The second suspect in the investigation was Lee Gerard Pet's 18-year-old daughter, and Brandon's girlfriend. Lee was a bright and ambitious young woman who had just graduated from high school in June 2021. She was excited to start college in the fall, with plans to study business administration at the University of New Orleans. Friends and family described Lee as kind-hearted but sometimes overshadowed by her mother's dominant personality. Lee and Brandon had been dating for 2 years, and by all accounts they were deeply in love. They had even talked about getting married after Lee finished high school, a plan that had excited both families in their conservative southern town, where the average age for marriage was 18. However, the revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon had shattered Lee's world. The discovery of the betrayal left her heartbroken and full of rage, but she claimed to have had nothing to do with Brandon's death. When the detectives questioned Lee, she looked emotionally drained. She wore jeans and a t-shirt from her high school class, making her seem much younger than she was, almost childlike in her grief. Detective Duval and Detective Martinez began the interrogation, gently asking her to recount her relationship with Brandon and how she discovered the affair. Lee's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes welling up with tears. She described how she had accidentally stumbled upon sexually explicit text messages between her mother and Brandon just days before his death. The discovery had led to a heated argument between her and Paulette, but Lee claimed she had tried to move past it. "I loved Brandon and didn't want to lose him," she said, almost in a whisper. However, when asked about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Lee's story became less clear. She insisted that she had been at a sleepover at her friend Taylor's house, just a few blocks from Brandon's home. But she struggled to provide details about the night. Taylor, when questioned separately, confirmed that Lee had been there, but mentioned that Lee had left around midnight, a few hours before the estimated time of the murder. As the detectives pressed further, Lee's attitude shifted from sorrow to defensiveness. She denied any involvement in Brandon's death, but the anger in her voice was evident. "I would never hurt him," she repeated, though her hands trembled as she spoke when shown the evidence of the affair, including the explicit messages from Paulette to Brandon. Lee broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Her pain was palpable, but it also raised suspicions. Was she mourning the loss, or was there something more she was hiding, despite her emotional state? Lee maintained her innocence throughout the interrogation. She admitted to feeling betrayed and angry, but insisted she wasn't capable of murder. However, her shaky alibi and the intensity of her emotions left Detective Duval with lingering doubts. The third suspect in the investigation was Richard "Rick" Gerard, Lee's father and Pet's husband. Richard, 47, was a well-known attorney, in meteri recognized for his sharp legal mind and his ability to win cases, though also for his tendency to be absent from home due to his demanding work schedule. Richard was a man who valued appearances. He took pride in maintaining a perfect family image, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the issues brewing in his own household. Although Richard was often at the office or in court, he wasn't completely unaware of the tension and sexual jealousy games between Paulette and Lee. He had his suspicions about Pet's inappropriate sexual interest in other men, but he chose to ignore it, hoping the situation would resolve itself. When the police called Richard in for questioning, he arrived composed, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie, as if preparing for a day in court. Detectives Duval and Martinez began the interrogation by asking Richard about his relationship with his wife and daughter. Richard described his marriage to Paulette as complicated, but insisted they had a strong bond and maintained a regular sexual relationship. He claimed his relationship with Lee was also good, though he admitted they weren't as close as he would have liked, partly due to his long work hours. The detectives then shifted the focus to Brandon Tibido. Richard admitted to liking Brandon and seeing him as a good match for Lee. However, when confronted with the affair between Brandon and Paulette, Richard's demeanor changed. He clenched his jaw and avoided eye contact. Clearly uncomfortable with the topic, he claimed he hadn't known about the affair until after Brandon's death, stating, "If I had known, I would have stopped it immediately." The detectives pressed Richard about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stated that he had been working late at his office reviewing a case file for an upcoming trial. He provided the names of colleagues who could confirm his alibi, but his tone was defensive. Richard's response to the interrogation was calm but distant, giving the impression that he was hiding something. As the interrogation continued, Richard maintained his innocence, insisting that he had nothing to do with Brandon's death. However, his reluctance to discuss the affair and his apparent detachment from the situation left the detectives uneasy. Was Richard truly unaware of his wife's actions, or was he hiding something to protect his family's reputation despite his calm exterior? Richard's evasiveness during the questioning raised suspicions the detectives couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was letting on. On a scorching afternoon in mid-August 2021, the police received a tip that would change the course of the investigation around 3:00 p.m. Detective Duval's phone rang. The informant, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed to have critical information about Poet Gerard, one of the main suspects in the murder of Brandon Tibido. The informant hinted at something far more sinister than just an affair, a secret that Paulette had been hiding for years. The detectives wasted no time. They drove straight to Pet's office, located in a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of Meteri. The sign above the door read, "Beauty Buys," the name of the multi-level marketing business Paulette had been running for nearly a decade. From the outside, the office looked like any other small business. But inside, the detectives would uncover a shocking twist. As they entered the office, the detectives were struck by the eerie silence. The place was filled with beauty products, shelves lined with creams, lotions, and makeup, but there were no employees in sight. Detective Martinez noticed a locked door at the back of the office. After some persuasion, Pet's assistant, a nervous young woman in her early 20s, reluctantly handed over the key. Behind the door was Pet's private office, and what the detectives found inside was both disturbing and revealing. The walls were covered with photographs, many of them of Brandon, most of them sexually explicit and inappropriate. In one corner, there was a kind of makeshift altar dedicated to him, complete with candles, trinkets, and handwritten notes. It was clear that Pet's obsession with Brandon went far beyond a simple affair, but that wasn't all. As the detectives searched the office, they came across a stack of documents that exposed the dark side of Beauty Buys. The marketing scheme wasn't just a business. It was a scam that preyed on poor women in the South, many of them single mothers struggling financially. The documents revealed that Paulette had been exploiting these women, convincing them to invest thousands of dollars in beauty products they couldn't sell, while forcing them to work up to 20 hours a day to pay off their debts. The financial strain had ruined hundreds of lives, leaving these women in desperation. The discovery of Pet's fraudulent practices provided a new motive for the murder. Pet's world was beginning to unravel, and the pressure to maintain her image combined with her obsessive love for Brandon may have driven her to commit murder. With this new evidence, the police had a clearer picture of Pet Gerard, a woman who would do anything to protect her secrets, even if it meant committing murder. The detectives knew they were getting closer to the truth, but they also realized that uncovering the full extent of Pet's crimes wouldn't be easy. On August 21st, 2021, the police in meteri, Louisiana were finally ready to act. After gathering the evidence, including the disturbing revelations in Pet Gerard's office, there was no doubt about who was responsible for the brutal murder of Brandon Tibido. Poet 43 had become increasingly sexually obsessed with her daughter's boyfriend, leading her to commit an unthinkable crime. The night of the murder, Paulette confronted Brandon in the kitchen of his grandmother's house, a place where Brandon had taken her several times for secret encounters driven by jealousy and fear of losing control. Paulette grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Brandon multiple times. The attack was savage, leaving him with deep wounds and his eyes nearly gouged out after the murder. Paulette attempted to cover her tracks, but her obsession with Brandon and her fraudulent activities eventually led the police straight to her. The arrest took place in the early hours of the morning. August 21st, police arrived at Pet's luxurious home in a quiet suburban neighborhood just as the sun was rising. They knocked on the door, and Paulette answered, still dressed in her silk pajamas, clearly not expecting visitors. The detectives calmly informed her that she was under arrest for the murder of Brandon Tibido. Poet's reaction was a mix of shock and defiance. She tried to maintain her composure. But the police could see the panic in her eyes as Paulette was handcuffed and led to the police car. Her neighbors watched in disbelief. Many of them had admired Paulette for her business success, unaware of the truth behind her glamorous facade. News of her arrest spread quickly through the community, and by the time the police car pulled away, the streets were already buzzing with gossip. Back at the station, Paulette was booked and placed in a holding cell. The detectives interrogated her, but she denied everything, insisting she was innocent. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the police were confident they had the right person. The arrest brought a sense of relief to Brandon's family, who had been living in fear and UNC certainty since his death. The case was far from over, but with Pet Gerard in custody, the police were one step closer to getting justice for Brandon Tibido. The trial of Pet Gerard for the murder of Brandon Tibido began on November 8th, 20121, at the Jefferson Parish Courthouse in Meteri, Louisiana. The case had attracted significant media attention, with local outlets like the Times-Picayune covering every detail. The courtroom was packed with spectators, eager to see how the case would unfold. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Tremblay, a veteran lawyer known for his tenacity in the courtroom. Tremblay, 52, had a reputation for being thorough and reliable, and this case was no exception. From the start, he painted a damning picture of Paulette as a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. He argued that Paulette had brutally murdered Brandon in a fit of rage after he tried to end their affair. He used physical evidence and testimony from investigators to back up his case. Tremblay also exposed Pet's fraudulent activities at beauty buys as a scheme that exploited vulnerable women, adding to the image of her as a manipulative and dangerous person. In Pet's defense was attorney Charles Chuck Lameau, a shrewd and experienced lawyer with a history of defending high-profile clients. Lameau, 48, was known for his calm demeanor and his ability to plant doubt in juror minds. He argued that the evidence against Paulette was circumstantial and suggested that another person, possibly Lee Gerard, could have committed the crime. Lameau also tried to humanize Paulette, portraying her as a loving mother and successful businesswoman who had been unfairly targeted by the media and prosecution. As the trial progressed, the emotional impact on Brandon's family was evident. His grandmother, who had raised him, attended every session, clutching a worn photograph of Brandon. His girlfriend, Lee Gerard, sat with her father, both visibly affected by the proceedings. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, especially during the testimony of the lead detective, who detailed the gruesome nature of Brandon's wounds and the evidence linking Paulette to the crime. On November 22, 2021, after 2 weeks of testimony and just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Pet Gerard was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with cries of relief from Brandon's family, while Paulette remained stoic, though her face turned pale as the word guilty echoed through the courtroom. Sentencing took place on December 1, 2021. Pet was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence marked a harsh but fitting end to a case that had shocked the community for Brandon's family. The verdict brought a sense of justice, but the pain of losing him would never fully fade. The trial also exposed the darker side of beauty buys, leading to further investigations into the company's practices. The sentencing closed a chapter, but it left many in the community reflecting on the tragedy and its lasting impact. After the trial, life in Meteri, Louisiana slowly returned to normal, but the shock of Brandon Tibido murder lingered in the community. The once bustling Gerard household was now silent. Pet Gerard, once admired for her business acumen and charisma, was now remembered as an obsessed killer whose world collapsed, leading to the death of a promising young man. For his part, Richard Gerard, who had tried to maintain composure throughout the trial, and his wife's conviction, gradually withdrew from public life. Although he continued working as an attorney, his reputation had been tarnished by the events surrounding his family. The tragedy and scandal that engulfed his wife and daughter weighed heavily on him, and the rumors and whispers about his family followed him wherever he went. Lee Gerard, whose life had been irrevocably changed, struggled to move forward. The revelation of her mother's affair with Brandon and his brutal murder had shattered her world. Lee left Meteri shortly after the trial, enrolling in a college out of state to escape the painful memories Though she tried to focus on her studies, the trauma was never far from her mind. Friends said that she became more withdrawn, no longer the bright and ambitious girl she once was. The aftermath of the trial also had a significant impact on the community at large. Beauty Buys Pet's multi-level marketing business came under intense scrutiny. Investigations revealed the extent of the financial and emotional harm caused by the company, leading to its eventual shutdown. Many women who had invested in the business were left in debt, their lives upended by the scam local media. Outlets like WWL-TV continued to cover the fallout, and the scandal became a cautionary tale about the dangers of predatory businesses. In the end, the trial and its consequences left a lasting mark on everyone involved. It was a tragic reminder of how lives can be quickly torn apart and how one person's actions can ripple through an entire community. Amid this devastating case, the meteri community was deeply affected. What began as a dark secret spiraled into a tragedy that left everyone in shock. The repercussions of Brandon Tibido's murder were felt far beyond his immediate family and close friends, affecting the entire community. The Gerard family home, once a hub of social activity and success, became silent and desolate. Poet Gerard, once admired for her business and charisma, was now remembered as a murderer whose obsession led to the death of a young man with a bright future. Meanwhile, the Beauty Buys company was finally shut down after investigations. The truth about its operations came to light, revealing that it was a scam preying on desperate women, leaving them in debt and without hope. Local authorities and the media closely followed the company's closure, serving as a reminder to the community of the dangers that lurk behind seeming attractive but fraudulent businesses. Pet Gerard, who had tried to maintain composure throughout the trial, slowly retreated from public life. Though he continued working as an attorney, the events surrounding his wife and daughter cast a long shadow over his professional and personal life. The whispers and gossip about his family followed him everywhere, and he became increasingly withdrawn. Gerard, who had once been full of dreams and promise, sought distance from her past and the community that had once been her home. Though she attempted to start anew, far from the memories of her mother's betrayal and Brandon's violent death, the emotional scars ran deep. Brandon Tibido's murder also left an indelible mark on the law enforcement officers who worked on the case. Detective Duval and Detective Martinez, who led the investigation, faced one of the most challenging cases of their careers. While they successfully secured justice for Brandon, the horrific crime scene and emotional complexities of the case would stay with them for years to come. In conclusion, the story of Brandon Tibido and the events leading to his tragic death served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked desire and obsession. The community, though it slowly began to heal, would never forget the case that shook its foundation ions and left a deep scar on its collective memory. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What sentence would you have given? Leave a comment and I'll be reading Enjoy Life, because we only have one. Yours truly, the detective.